I placed the $80 million contract on the table, looked my brother in the eye, and said, "I own the debt. Every cent." The room went silent. My sister's face turned pale. And my father? He couldn't speak. Just hours earlier, they were mocking me over dinner, calling me aimless, invisible. "Hi, I'm Maya, the failure daughter, the one they overlooked, until I walked into the boardroom as the CEO they never saw coming. Want to know how I went from thrift store blazers to controlling the legacy they built their pride on? Stay with me. This story isn't just about business. It's about reclaiming your voice when no one's listening. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I kept my coat on a little longer than necessary as I stood outside the restaurant, staring at the flickering reflection in the window. North plus South always looked like it belonged in a magazine. Sleek wood paneling, dim Edison lights, and staff who addressed everyone by last name. But that evening it felt more like a stage I hadn't auditioned for. Inside, I spotted them right away. Sienna was mid-story, waving a champagne flute, her laughter sharper than the crystal. Jason scrolled on his phone with one hand while holding a fork in the other. My parents sat across from them, Charles in his usual navy sport coat, Linda already critiquing the table arrangement, no doubt. I slid into the last empty seat, offered a quiet "hi," and unfolded my napkin. No one asked how I was. That wasn't how Carter dinners worked. They asked what you had to show. Sienna leaned forward, her voice bubbling. "So we just finalized phase 2 of the lakefront condos. 20 units, all spoken for. The investors were practically lining up." Jason jumped in. "And guess who got invited to the Sphere Tech conference next month? They're flying me out, private lounge access and all." Linda nodded, proud. "It's just nice to see the two of you thriving, taking real steps." My father didn't say much at first. He just looked at me the way he always had, like I was a misplaced item on an otherwise tidy shelf. "What's going on with your admin job, Maya?" he asked, reaching for the broccolini. "Still doing spreadsheets and scheduling Zoom calls?" "Something like that," I said, steady. "Keeps me busy." Jason didn't look up. "Do you even work with actual clients or just inboxes?" I smiled faintly. "Depends on the day." Sienna took a bite of her slider and grinned. "You should apply at Westbridge Holdings. They probably need a good receptionist. Big merger happening tomorrow." "Really?" I said, sipping water. Charles nodded. "It's a big deal, prestigious. Westbridge is sending in their CEO to sign the partnership. Carter Holdings is making moves." "I read they're very selective," Linda added. "Only work with high-tier firms. You'd probably need a recommendation just to get in the building." No one noticed Ava glancing sideways at me. She didn't say anything, but her silence didn't carry judgment, just something softer. The waiter returned, asking if we'd like dessert. Sienna ordered creme brulee. Jason declined. "No carbs after 7. I passed. Charles leaned back in his chair and exhaled heavily. "Maya, you're 35. Are you just going to float forever?" I lifted my glass, water, not wine, and met his gaze. "You might be surprised by tomorrow." The air didn't change, no dramatic pause. Just a beat of silence before Jason launched into a rant about blockchain. Still, I caught Ava looking again, and for the first time that evening, someone held my eye without trying to weigh me. The first thing I did when I got home was take off the blazer. It wasn't uncomfortable, just a uniform for a role I didn't sign up for. My loft was still and cool, a world apart from the ambient noise of candlelight dinners and cocktail voices. I flipped on a single floor lamp, just enough to keep the dark from creeping in. I walked past the open shelves I'd built myself and into the living room where my laptop waited, already humming. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old paper. I'd left the window cracked, and the city outside moved like distant static. Cars humming, someone's dog barking 3 blocks over. I logged into my encrypted dashboard, fingertips steady. The interface lit up with real-time analytics, holding companies, shell transactions, investment flows. It was clean, organized, efficient. Jordan had already left me a note in our secure thread. All cleared. Langton Tower confirmed for 10 a.m. No suspicion. I typed back, perfect. Confirm the last transfer. A few seconds passed. Done. Jason had joked once that CEOs probably never had to split rent. I did, for years. I split rent with 2 roommates, one of whom forgot to flush and the other who thought drum practice at 2 a.m. was soul cleansing. They were kind, though. Didn't ask too many questions. That same year, when Argonne Matrix, the AI firm I worked for, nearly folded, I bought it. Quietly. I'd saved every bonus, diverted every consulting paycheck. The founders were geniuses but couldn't manage a balance sheet to save their lives. I let them keep their titles. I kept the company. It became Westbridge Holdings. No press release, no profile, just progress. There were nights I lived on noodles and filtered coffee, days when I negotiated contracts over borrowed Wi-Fi. But control came, piece by piece. Trust funds, Delaware LCs, layered ownership. Silence was part of the plan. I clicked open a folder marked Carter Internal, a full audit of their real estate valuations, credit exposure, mismanaged leverage, all legally obtained, all telling. They never saw me coming. The memory surfaced without warning. Sienna laughing at my car outside a family brunch. "You know they're giving tax breaks for scrapping those now?" she had said, tapping her key fob against her Tesla's hood. That morning, I'd signed off on a $12 million asset deal. There was a knock from the inside of me, the one I'd taught to stay quiet for years. But tonight, she stirred. I scrolled to the contract folder. 80 million, full operational control. The table they'd be sitting at tomorrow didn't just have my name on the deal. I owned the boardroom, the chairs, the HVAC lease, and they'd thank me for the chance. A final ping from Jordan broke the quiet. "Are we ready?" I didn't hesitate. "I've been ready for 7 years." "Good morning," I said to the front desk agent. "Maya Ellis, I'm here with Westbridge." She looked up from her tablet, politely neutral until she registered the name. Her eyebrows lifted just enough to notice, and she tapped something on her screen. After a beat, she straightened in her seat and smiled. "Yes, of course. You're cleared for the executive elevator. 40's already unlocked." Jordan, walking beside me in a dove-gray coat and holding the leather portfolio, gave a small nod. I adjusted the sleeve of my midnight blue suit, fingers brushing over the cuff. No logos. No flash, just tailored precision. The marble floor gleamed beneath our steps as we crossed the lobby. The same lobby I'd walked through once before, years ago, trailing behind Sienna and my parents as they toured the space during its grand opening. Back then, I'd stayed quiet and held their coats. Now, no one held mine. Inside the glass elevator, Jordan checked his watch. 5 minutes. I glanced at our reflection. I looked like someone they wouldn't recognize. That was intentional. As we rose, the city dropped below us, rooftops turning into geometry, traffic melting into soft movement. I could still hear my mother's voice from the year before, sharp and certain. "You'll never belong in skyscrapers, Maya. Some people just aren't made for altitude." The elevator chimed at floor 40. I stepped out without hesitation. The hallway was lined with modern art, cool abstracts, all navy and brass. I heard laughter beyond the glass conference doors. Through the frosted panel, Sienna's voice floated out. "I heard the CEO is some cold New Yorker with a stick in her blazer." Jason added something I couldn't catch, followed by my father's low chuckle. Inside, they were at ease. Plates of croissants and silver carafes of coffee sat untouched, while the family warmed up with gossip and pride. They were rehearsing for legacy, unaware the script had changed. At exactly 10 o'clock, Jordan opened the boardroom door. The room stilled immediately. 4 heads turned. Sienna froze mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing like she'd seen a ghost. Jason straightened in his chair, confused. My father blinked once, then again, as if trying to process whether I was real. I walked in, slow but deliberate, each step quiet on the polished floor. I placed my briefcase on the table and clicked open the latches. The sound was soft, but in the silence, it might as well have been thunder. Sienna finally spoke, her voice unsteady. "Maya?" "Yes," I said, looking directly at her. "I'm the CEO." Jordan began distributing packets to each person around the table, his expression calm, efficient. No introductions, no explanations, just execution. I didn't sit. I didn't offer small talk. I opened the top folder and said, "Let's begin." My mother shifted in her chair, clutching her pearls like a reflex. Jason glanced toward the door as if still expecting someone else to walk in. He found his voice first. "You, what are you doing here?" I pulled out the signed contract and placed it gently in the center of the table, taking control. Jason looked like he'd just seen his stock portfolio vanish. Sienna's mouth was a tight line of disbelief, her perfectly lined lipstick cracking at the corners. My father had gone rigid, his hands clenched against the arms of his chair like he'd tasted something bitter and couldn't spit it out. The contract lay open in front of them. The Carter Holdings logo sat at the top of the page, but the terms were mine. "Let's begin with Section 7.2, I said, flipping to the tabbed page. "Any operational misrepresentation by existing leadership nullifies project oversight." Sienna leaned forward, bristling. "This can't be binding. I've led Waterfront Vista since day one. That clause wasn't in the preliminary drafts." "It was in the final version your council approved," I replied calmly, not even glancing up. "Perhaps your team assumed you'd never trigger it," Jason interjected. "Hold on, these figures. Your people must be misreading the ROI. We've got a clean 12-point spread." I turned a second folder around and slid it toward him. "Actually, your margin's sitting at -4 when you factor in leveraged exposure. That shortfall was patched by a Westbridge subsidiary, quietly." The legal advisor, seated a little too still at the end of the table, cleared his throat but said nothing. Linda finally broke the silence. "Why? Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her then, the way you might look at someone who'd called out across a canyon and expected an echo. "Because you weren't listening." My father's jaw tightened. "This is outrageous. You don't just walk in and take over everything." I didn't flinch. "That's not what I've done. I've been here all along. You just didn't look close enough." Jordan set a third packet in front of Jason, this one thin but precise. "These are your debt positions across 3 property arms," I said, "all refinanced through Westbridge Instruments. Your assets are ours now." Jason's hand hovered above the page, but he didn't touch it. Sienna stood. "You can't remove me from the project. I built Vista from scratch. My name's on every document." "You fronted the project," I corrected. "The money came from us, and starting today, Ava is assuming oversight." For a split second, Sienna's eyes flicked toward her wife. Ava didn't move. She just looked at me, her gaze steady, not smug, just settled, as if this had been coming for a long time and she'd known where her center of gravity was all along. Sienna turned back to me. "You planned this." "No," I said softly. "I protected it. From the inside out." The silence in the room was different now, no longer stunned, just heavy. Jason finally broke it with a whisper, more to himself than to me. You own the debt?" I met his eyes without a blink. "Every cent." They arrived 10 minutes early. That was new. Jordan opened the door to the dining suite, letting in the soft sound of jazz and the scent of seared scallops drifting in from the adjacent kitchen. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Austin skyline in soft amber light. The city below pulsed gently. Above it, everything was quiet. Charles stepped in first, pausing to study the artwork on the wall. "Very tasteful," he said, like a man grading a hotel lobby. Linda trailed behind, eyes wide. "Oh, these are Cristofoli utensils," she whispered, running a finger along a dessert fork. "Did you know these are hand-polished in France?" Jason offered a faint nod as he took his seat. He looked like a man recently reminded of gravity. Sienna smiled too quickly. "This is lovely, Maya. I mean, it's good to see you, like this." "I'm glad you came," I replied. Dinner began with quiet small talk. Jordan poured wine without asking. The servers moved like choreography, silent, seamless. The beet salad was earthy and bright. The lamb chops arrived cooked precisely, plated with roasted figs and a whisper of mint. It was the kind of meal built to impress, but I didn't need to impress them anymore. Sienna leaned in as the main course ended. "You know," she said, her voice lilting with something that almost passed for sincerity, "we've always known you were capable. We just didn't always understand your path." I looked at her evenly. "You assumed there wasn't one." She blinked, then laughed as if I were joking. Jason focused on cutting his lamb into precise quarters. My mother reached for the wine. "We were trying to support you the best we could." I nodded. "Your version of support came with a lot of commentary." For a moment, no one spoke. Jordan returned with dessert menus. I waved mine away. Ava stood from her seat. "Excuse me," she said to the group, then stepped quietly into the hallway. I followed a moment later. We stood near the window, the city behind her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Do what?" "Include me. Trust me. Give me the space Sienna never could." I paused, watching the light catch in the glass. Sometimes we invest in people the way we wish someone had invested in us. She smiled. Not broadly, just enough. Back inside, I returned to my seat. I lifted my glass. "To growth," I said, "especially the kind no one noticed, until now." There was a beat of silence. Charles cleared his throat. "We were just trying to help you." I met his eyes. "You were trying to shape me. I chose not to fit." Last Friday, I donated the Civic. The man from the shelter smiled politely as he filled out the receipt, unaware that the car had seen more boardrooms than most executives. I handed him the key, paused for a second longer than I expected, then walked away. It deserved more than a silent goodbye. But maybe silence was fitting. Now, the last box sat by the door of my old loft. A single bookshelf remained, empty except for a folded fleece blanket I'd meant to give away but decided to keep. I took one final look around the space. The walls were still the same soft gray I'd painted them after I got my first freelance contract. Back then, I thought paint would be the only mark I'd leave behind. I closed the door gently. No glance back. At Westbridge Tower, the elevator chimed at the penthouse. Jordan was waiting inside, handing me a key fob, a fresh lease, and a short smile. "Everything's in place," he said. "Thank you, Jordan." "Want me to unpack anything?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He left me there, in the center of a space designed for people used to taking up room. The ceiling stretched higher than any apartment I'd ever lived in. The windows swallowed the skyline whole. I walked slowly through the rooms. The kitchen gleamed, untouched. The bedroom faced west. The study had 3 empty bookshelves and a single armchair. One room at the far end I left bare. No furniture, no article, just space. I made coffee and stepped out onto the private rooftop. The sun was pulling its last light across the city, turning buildings gold and shadows long. From up here, traffic looked calm. The world looked calm. My phone buzzed. It was from my mother. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I stared at the message for a long time. There was a version of me that would have replied, explained, softened. But she was quiet now. I turned the phone face down. For the first time in years, I felt still. No striving, no pretending, just breath, coffee, and space. They used to mock my silence, called it passive, weak, indecisive. But silence was never weakness. It was how I listened, how I learned, and how I built everything that mattered. They called me a failure long enough that I believed it. But silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. I didn't need applause when I gave away the Civic, and I didn't expect closure when I turned off the lights in that old loft. But something in the quiet felt earned, like I had finally stepped fully into myself. Sometimes the people closest to us are too loud to hear who we're becoming. Real power isn't about shouting louder. It's about listening deeply, acting quietly, and trusting that worth doesn't need permission to grow. We don't have to fit the mold to make a mark. If this story reminded you of your own quiet strength or someone who once underestimated it, feel free to share your thoughts. I'd love to know what stayed with you.